Hello and welcome to Africa Today. I am Esther Mokwariola. Home to some of the most promising nations of the world, Africa is largely a mixed bag where lessons from history presents a lineup of tyrants who once thought they were beyond justice and dictators who assumed they were indispensable. So when the International Criminal Court was established in 2002, the need to hold perpetrators accountable at some point meant juggling between the ideals of international jurisprudence and national sovereignty, where in trying to be candid and not vague, a few African countries threatened to pull out of The Hague. And so we ask, what are your thoughts on latest developments with the ICC overturning the verdict of former Congolese warlord and politician Jean-Pierre Bemba? You can join the conversation and share your thoughts with us on Twitter at TVC News NG. We take a report now, and Africa Today will be right back. Welcome on board.
The International Criminal Court ICC on Friday overturned the war crimes conviction of former Democratic Republic of Congo Vice President Jean-Pierre Bemba, a huge blow to prosecutors that could also impact politics in his home country. Judge Christian van de Vingeert said Bemba, once the leader of the Congo's main opposition party, could not be held criminally responsible for crimes carried out by troops under his control in the Central African Republic in 2002 to 2003. Dismissing his 18-year sentence, Judge Christian said trial judges had failed to consider his efforts to stop crimes committed by his Movement for the Liberation of Congo, MLSC, once he became aware of them, and how difficult it would have been for him to control the troops' actions from a distance. The judge added that Bemba's efforts to stop the crimes extinguished his responsibility in full. ICC prosecutor Fatou Bensouda called the decision regrettable and troubling.
And Mr. Bemba cannot be held criminally responsible under Article 28 for the crimes committed by MLC troops during the CAR operation. In relation to the remaining criminal acts, it enters an acquittal because the errors found with respect to necessary and reasonable measures extinguish his responsibility in full.
Bemba was one of the only 4 people convicted by the Permanent War Crimes Court in its 16 years of operation, and the highest ranking among them. His case was also the first that focused on sexual violence as a weapon of war that was heard by the ICC. Bemba appealed the verdict months after the ruling, citing numerous procedural and legal errors in the process, and claimed there were grounds for a mistrial. The son of a businessman who became rich through years of close association with former Congolese leader Mobutu Sese Seko, Bemba entered government under current President Joseph Kabila in 2003 as part of a power-sharing deal that ended years of civil war. Bemba failed to win the presidency against Kabila in 2006 and consequently became Congo's most prominent opposition figure. He fled into exile in 2007, saying he feared for his life. He was also arrested in Belgium in 2008 and was transferred to the ICC in The Hague. He had been convicted of murder, rape and pillage for actions by fighters assigned to Central African Republic to back CR's then-president, Ange Felix Patasse.
Recent years have seen a brewing standoff between African leaders and prosecutors at The Hague, who are quick to describe the continent as a place where the rules of engagement are often not guaranteed in the face of war and civil unrest. Now, the International Criminal Court recently overturned the conviction of former Congolese politician Jean-Pierre Bemba, a blow to prosecutors and victims of war crimes in the Central African Republic. Joining me on Skype, I have Babatunde Fagbayibu, Associate Professor of Law at the University of South Africa in Pretoria, South Africa. And I also have on Skype Dr. John Mbaku, lecturer at the Weber State University in the United States and non-resident senior fellow, Brookings Institution. Good to have you both on the program.
Good. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Let me begin with you now, Babatunde. What are your thoughts, first off, on the ICC's verdict, overturning Bemba's conviction?
You see, the issue is this. Bemba had every right to appeal that decision,
Right.
Because if you look at the context within which Bemba was sentenced or convicted in 2016, one could not establish a direct criminal responsibility. I mean, for you to establish a direct criminal responsibility, you need to be able to prove that Bemba gave direct orders and the troops on the ground were reporting directly to Jean-Pierre Bemba. But the situation was that Bemba had offered his troop to Félix Patassé, the late Félix Patassé, the president of Central African Republic. And at that point in time, one could say that the troop was under the direct control and the direct responsibility of Félix Patassé, and Félix Patassé was never charged. So this was not, this did not come as a surprise. Of course, one would not again completely absolve Jean-Pierre Bemba of some crimes committed within the territories of DR Congo, which his troops had committed, or some of the crimes committed in the Central African Republic. But we're looking at the legal aspect of this. And for you to prove this, you have to prove beyond every reasonable doubt.
Right.
And the prosecution in this case could not prove beyond every reasonable doubt that Jean-Pierre Bemba gave the direct order. And of course, Jean-Pierre Bemba, of course, had also said that he had organized, when some of the, when he got to know about this, he had sanctioned some of the military officers within his rebel movement. So I mean, from a legal point of view, one could say, I mean, the politics of it is a different case entirely.
Right.
But from a legal point of view, one could say that Jean-Pierre Bemba could not be held directly responsible for some of the crimes committed, war crimes and crimes against humanity.
All right, Dr. John, let me quickly come to you here now. Let's look at the victims of war in this case, because according to Amnesty International, this deals a big blow to them, because being a victim of war and having nowhere justice is being granted, they're more or less left in a limbo. So what happens to them at this point, talking about the victims of war?
Well, this is the $60,000 question. What happens to these people who have waited for more than 15 years for justice? Thought they were granted justice when Bemba was convicted, but now justice has been taken away from them. This is an issue that the international community needs to look at, and the African Union also needs to pay close attention to, primarily because what is happening now is that the Central African Republic is not in a position to provide relief to these people. And the question is, if that is true, then who should? There has to be some reckoning in terms of the international community, the UN, and the African Union. These organizations have to be able to do something to provide some level of justice to this, to the people who were harmed by Bemba's troops.
But if you look at this matter now, do you think the victims, perhaps or perchance, they might find justice in the end?
Well, it is possible that, as Babatunde has mentioned, Bemba's troops committed other crimes that Bemba has not been held responsible for. I think that what has happened is that the ICC was not very careful in its prosecution of Bemba. An international tribunal of its caliber should have realized that the type of evidence that they used to convict Bemba would eventually not be found to be the type of evidence that you can convict someone for the crimes that he was charged. Bemba was essentially charged for not, you could say in layman's terms, not supervising his troops well enough to prevent them from committing the types of crimes that they committed in the Central African Republic. But any lawyer would have known at the time that when that conviction is appealed, it will be possible for the appeals chamber to realize that Bemba was not in a position to be able to supervise the troops that were in the Central African Republic. And so it is necessary during these prosecutions, something that we can learn from here, that the prosecutors will be very careful in making sure that they present evidence that can actually convict someone beyond a reasonable doubt, so that the victims are not placed in the position they are now.
Right, let's keep it at that for now. Let's quickly go on a very quick break. You're watching Africa Today, and we've been looking at the latest developments with the ICC overturning the verdict of former Congolese warlord and politician Jean-Pierre Bemba. Welcome back. In a 3-2 majority ruling, judges concluded that the trial chamber erred in its evaluation of Bemba's verdict. Prior to this landmark ruling, vocal groups within the African Union in recent years have accused the International Criminal Court of needlessly focusing on Africa since it was established in 2002. Now, Babatunde, let's quickly look at diligent prosecution of the ICC, part of what Dr. Mbaku raised up in his point earlier on. What are you expecting to see the ICC doing when handling cases of war crimes, talking about how to handle, prosecute its cases diligently?
Yes, I completely agree with Dr. Mbaku there, in the sense that the ICC, the prosecution should have tightened its case, because issues of criminal prosecution at the ICC is a very, very, very complex one, extremely complex. You're not dealing with a domestic jurisdiction where you have the police, you have, everything around you. At times, you'll have to fly in your witnesses. At times, some of your witnesses are exposed to serious danger within the national territory. So all of those things, some of these issues, the prosecution, and I see that Fatou Bensouda has actually said this is very regrettable. Yes, but again, they have to do serious introspection and to understand that they have actually lost this case because they were not able to present a watertight case. And the ramifications of this, of course, it could go various ways. Number one, it could strengthen the claim by many within the African continent that the ICC only focuses on African issues, only focuses on Africans and all of those things. So it could strengthen that case to say, look at what has happened here. You guys could not even successfully prosecute a case like this, where there's been serious crimes and things like that. So it could actually work in that way. But the thing is this, the reality is this, we need the ICC. You see, I think some of the arguments we should be having is not so much about dismantling the ICC. It is about working from within to change the system and to actually strengthen the system. Lots of crimes are committed, and many people who argue that ICC only focuses on Africa. The question they should be asking is this: was there no crime committed in those particular places where you find the ICC? And many of the victims in these cases will not get justice. I mean, the EU is not there to help anyone. Sub-regional organizations are not there to help anyone. Many people have been killed, millions have been displaced, and of course, the next question is this: so what is the next step? So for me, I think there has to be serious introspection with regards to the prosecution in the ICC.
Yeah, in terms of introspection, Babatunde, I'm also thinking perhaps, because, the ICC largely depends on the state for arrests and other things in terms of witnesses and all of that. But where you have the ICC depending on the state, where cases are being referred to, they are a bit limited, aren't they? So how can they break this, dependence, as it were, and ensure that they carry out, their cases holistically?
Yes, but the thing is, look, because there's no international police and there's no international army.
True.
So international organizations, international courts like the ICC will have to, at some point rely on national governments. They will have to rely on national police, even on Interpol in some cases. So that's not even an issue about relying on them. The question is, you've had a situation, for example, you saw the Kenya case, how the ICC could not successfully prosecute that case because there was no support. You were trying to prosecute the president, of course. The president has a lot of clout, and many of the witnesses that they had lined up, of course, ended up not being credible or not being wanting to be seen as opposing the government. So you see, in terms of this introspection, for example, you need a critical reflection on the part of the ICC. The state parties have to come together. Everybody has to go back to the drawing board and understand that some of these issues, even in the African case, for example, some of, we always say the ICC only focuses on Africa, but some of these cases were self-referrals in the first place.
Yeah, indeed.
So you ask yourself, yes, there were self-referrals. The Ugandan case was self-referral. We have to ask ourselves serious questions, critical questions, and perhaps some of the issues, some of the failings as well. When we do on the African continent, when we do critical reflection, is to understand that our regional organizations, our sub-regional organizations, have been found wanting in terms of successfully dealing with some of these issues. So it's a very complex one. It is complex. Nobody envisaged that it was going to be an easy process, even when the ICC was started.
Yeah.
The US is not even part of the ICC. So look, so these are some of the issues that have been raised over the years. So on both sides, there have to be serious considerations or serious considerations of some of these issues.
Right. Now, let me quickly come to Dr. John here. Now, let's look at the strength of the ICC to effectively prosecute cases, as it were, because right now some African countries are threatening to pull out of The Hague because of alleged bias of some sort. How do you think the ICC can, help address this, issue, which seems to affect its credibility of handling cases without bias, as it were?
Well, I think the ICC has a very big problem, and as an international tribunal, it has a lot of resources, financial resources, so that's not the problem. It also has significant manpower. But I think what Professor Babatunde was saying is really relevant, and that is the ICC has already shown that it's not able to provide justice to Africans in two cases already, the Kenyan case and now this one in DRC. That is not very good for the ICC, because the ICC came as a court of last resort, because it was in 2002, it was argued that there were many African countries that crimes were being committed, international crimes were being committed, and nobody was being held responsible for these crimes because the African countries did not have the capacity to deliver justice. That was a very convincing argument. And so many African countries supported the ICC. But as it appears now, the ICC is not delivering the justice that it was supposed to be delivering. And the question is, what is the way forward? I think the most important lesson that we can get from here, and this is a lesson that the ICC needs to learn, and that is it has to strengthen its ability to prosecute cases. The ICC needs the cooperation of many countries in Africa, but you have to understand that when it comes to cooperation within countries, that kind of cooperation is very difficult to get, because if you are trying to convict a warlord in DRC, it's not going to be easy to convince people in DRC to go to The Hague and testify against someone who has so much power domestically, either because he's a warlord with a lot of resources, or he's a member of a very powerful ethnic group within the country.
So, Dr. John, where do we go from here if we're having all these obstacles and bottlenecks?
Yes. Well, what I'm trying to say here is that these obstacles are not obstacles that cannot be overcome. But in order for you to overcome them as a tribunal, you have to recognize them. And I think that the ICC is not really recognizing these issues, because if they were, it would be able to provide the kind of protection to witnesses that will allow them to testify effectively and allow the ICC to be able to undertake its job as well as it should be.
So if I were to come to you now, Babatunde, would you say the African Union has a role to play in this regard? Because largely Africans need to have their own court. You would agree?
You see, handling international crimes is actually not a cheap exercise.
Right.
You need serious finances. The African Union has proved over the years, like number one, member states don't contribute, and at some point the budget for the entire judicial system in the African Union was, I mean, not more than $5 billion US. I mean, you can't even successfully prosecute an international crime with that little amount. So instead of trying to create, and you see, there's a big problem. The African Union has created its own court, as a matter of fact, which they call the African Criminal Court. It has not yet become law because you need at least 15 member states to ratify it. I think the last time I checked, which was last week, only 2 member states have ratified. But the thing is this: if you look at a particular section of that, it says sitting presidents cannot be prosecuted, no matter what they've done. No, sitting government, sitting presidents, and senior heads of government, you see, senior officials in government cannot, no matter what they have done. So if, for example, a president sits in his office and sends the army to go slaughter an entire village, and he says it on TV, according to the African Criminal Court, he cannot be prosecuted. I mean, that's a sham. That is completely nonsensical. That flies in the face of justice. So how do we trust the African Union to successfully handle a situation when it has proved that even with its own laws, it will protect brutal heads of states? So the problem, you see, so what we need to do, and you can see there's even no unity within the ranks of the African Union about pulling out of the African of the International Criminal Court.
Yeah.
Nigeria, for example, had said from the get-go that it will not pull out. Gambia pulled out initially, but Gambia is back. South Africa pulled out initially, but South Africa has reversed its decision. You know, only Burundi, of course, still Burundi has maintained its stance, of course, and we all know the reason why. So the future of handling criminal, handling some of these issues on the continent is, for example, looking at even issues of early warning systems. You see, because some of these issues, some of this conflict actually could have been nipped in the bud at very early stages, but nothing is being done about it. You see, when you see a president starting to tweak the constitution like Burundi is doing, 5 years along the line, you see escalation of crisis, you start hearing issues of genocide and all of those things. Then we become completely reactive to the situation. So perhaps the African Union needs to invest more in its early warning system structures, so that things don't escalate to this point.
Great point there.
Right,
let's quickly get the thoughts of Dr. John before we wrap up the show. Dr. John, what can you chip into what Faboyimbo just pointed out now?
I think he's made some excellent points. What we need to do as Africans is to realize that if we want justice in the continent, we have to deliver it ourselves. We cannot continue to look up to Europe to deliver justice for us, or to some other external venue. I mean, the thing is, we have been independent now for more than 60 years, and still we are not able to deliver justice to our own people. You see, as Professor Babatunde just mentioned, you see the opportunism implicit in the activities of presidents like Pierre Nkurunziza in Burundi and other African heads of states who believe that they were created to rule forever. Those kinds of attitudes toward politics and the fact that African countries are simply unable to come up with the revenues to provide justice to their own people locally, but are still able to fund large armies in countries that really don't need armies, tells us that we as Africans must sit down and ask ourselves, how are we going to deliver justice to our own people and not continue to remain on not continue to look up to the Europeans?
All right, that's a fine place to leave it now, Dr. John Mbaku. I'm so sorry I have to interrupt you, but you've made quite a point on this matter. Thank you very much, Dr. John Mbaku, for your contribution. And Babatunde Fagbayibu, Associate Professor from the University of South Africa in Pretoria. Thank you very much for your time as well on Africa.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
So much for a continent where a deficit in good governance continued to inspire some of the worst humanitarian crises in modern history, creating a situation where the wounds of brutality may never heal. Perhaps it is time for the African Union and the International Criminal Court to put aside bias and sentiments and stand up for victims of war crimes, many of whom stand little or no chance in seeing justice being served to perpetrators in their lifetime. And that is our package for today. But don't forget to join the conversation as usual on Twitter at TVC News NG, and also follow me for updates around Africa at Esther TVC News. Until the next one, I am Esther Omokwariola, and always remember, Africa can only get better.